Thank you very much. So I'll try to be brief because, as you know, as I know from intergenerational justice, the last generations always or sometimes get a little bit less of certain things. So the paper, the ideas I want to present you are about climate justice. I'm not going to adopt an African perspective, but I think that what I'm going to present you is relevant for what African negotiators and African environmental philosophers might want to defend with respect to climate justice. So the work I do belongs to what we refer to as philosophical theories of justice. And so philosophical theories of justice try to formulate accounts of what we owe each other as a matter of justice. So we may have duties towards each other as in ethical terms in general, and duties of justice are a subset of these ethical duties, those that we consider could be imposed by the state on us by force. Right? So it doesn't cover the whole set of ethical duties we may have towards each other and towards nature. It only covers a subset that we think of enforceable duties. Thank you. And so the point of the paper I want to present you, or the paper project I want to present you, is the idea that we should try to decolonize climate justice thinking. And it has been colonized by a corrective bias, a focus on corrective justice, and a tendency of trying to formulate all our duties as corrective duties as much as possible. And I think it's a mistake, and I would like to explain why I think we should correct this bias and, so to speak, decolonize climate thinking from corrective biases. So I will make 3 claims, and then I will try to defend that in 6 steps, and it shouldn't take more than 10 minutes, hopefully. Yeah, so the 3 claims are the following. The first claim is that corrective approaches, and I will explain what it means later on, corrective approaches to justice face major problems when it comes to dealing with actions from the past. That covers a lot of things. It covers slavery, it covers historical emissions of CO2. It covers many other actions in the past. So that's the first claim. The second claim is distributive account should come back to the fore and play a primary and more primary role than they currently play in the debates. That's the second claim. And the third claim is that if we shift from a corrective climate justice approach to a distributive climate justice approach, it's not likely that the intensity, the magnitude of our duties towards the global south are going to be smaller. And I think to the contrary. So the idea is not at all to say we have no duties towards the south regarding climate issues. I think there are major duties, but I think the grounds on which we try to ground these duties are the wrong ones, in part. Okay, so these are the 3 claims, and now I'm going to go through 6 steps, and I'm going to label each step so that you can find your way through these 6 steps. So the first step is called a distinction. So first of all, we are talking about corrective and distributive justice. What do we mean? And what we mean, it's not easy philosophically to define the exact difference between the two, but I can start with an image. If I had only one arm, imagine it could be due to 2 kind of sources. One is that it's a congenital feature of mine, that I have only one arm. And the other one is it's due to an accident that, so he was driving, he was not so careful that day, he bumped into me, I lost one arm. Okay, no problem. And then, so, yes, but of course, he is guilty, right? And so the question is, in those 2 cases, we may think we have a duty towards other people may have a duty towards me because I only have one arm and you all have 2. And of course, what is interesting is the duty, what's the ground of this duty? So in the congenital case, we will have the tendency to say the duty is a duty on all of you, due to the fact that I have one arm, you have 2 arms, and there is no reason for that. and there's no good reason why I should be disadvantaged compared to you. And so there will be a clear duty. It's going to fall on the whole society if you want, but the duty will exist, right? And it's going to be called a distributive duty if you want. If it comes from an accident, the duty will fall only on him, but it's also going to be maybe a duty of the same magnitude. It's just the source of the duty is different. And so in this second case, you will call this a corrective duty. So what the claim I'm making today is a claim about the grounds of our duties, not about the magnitude of these duties. So that's the distinction. And if you look at theories of justice, and there are many of them, libertarianism, utilitarianism, egalitarianism, sufficientarianism, there are many versions. All of them will provide you with principles that explain you what we owe each other, and of course, also what we don't owe each other. And you will have a distributive principle, like, for example, we should equalize X and Y. And then, of course, we will always have a corrective arm associated with this distributive view, saying that once we depart from this pattern, we have to bring things back to this pattern that we think is fair, right? And that's the corrective arm that every distributive view has. So I'm not saying that we don't need corrective justice. We always have corrective justice in all theories of justice, but we need to see that the main body of the main content of a theory of justice is not its corrective part, it's its distributive part that comes in the first place. Okay, so that's the distinction, and that was the first step. So the second step is a factual claim, and I'll label this step the bias. So I believe, and that's a factual assumption, that a lot of us tend to think that if we ground a duty on corrective grounds, it's going to have some advantage compared to a duty grounded on distributive grounds. The nature of this advantage, we can call it an X of some kind. So people will say it's more robust, or it's less difficult to justify, or it's more easily traceable to a duty holder, or it can have all sorts of advantages. But if you just think for yourself, if I only had one arm, probably a lot of you would think that the collective duty towards me would be a little bit weaker than the individual duty he would have as the person causally responsible for me having only one arm. So if you share this intuition, it means that you have this bias towards corrective justice. So I'm saying it's an empirical claim, empirical assumption, because we don't have so much evidence about how people think about these issues. But you can observe, for example, in the climate debate, that a lot of people tend to frame things in corrective terms. They say, you need to redistribute. You have a lot of duties because you've broken the climate. So you broke it, you fix it. That's the idea. So that's the empirical assumption, and it also holds for general theories of global justice. When you look at how certain authors justify our global duties, a lot of them feel the need to show that actually it's because of our unequal systems of exchange and all sorts of other things we did that we have duties towards the global south, right? And that's the reason why we have these duties. Philosophically, do we have any good reasons to endorse the corrective bias? For example, some people might say negative duties are less demanding than positive duties. So obviously, corrective duties rely on negative duties not to do certain things. And so obviously they would be easier to justify and therefore stronger in certain way. But of course, it's nothing obvious philosophically that negative duties are easier to justify than positive duties. And also, it's not at all obvious that complying with our numerous negative duties is something much easier to achieve than complying with our numerous positive duties. So that's the second step. We have this bias. And what I want to show is that in the specific case of situations involving acts from the past, and this is the case for climate justice when it comes to historical emissions, and you know that historical emissions of CO2 play a huge role in the negotiations, and they actually also play a huge causal role in the current climate global warming. So we face two problems. The first problem is that we think corrective duties are stronger than distributive duties. But where does the strength from corrective duties come from? It comes from a baseline. So for example, if he broke my arm, if he took my arm away through an accident, the reason why he owes me something is because I was entitled to my arm in the first place, right? So I need a baseline theory to explain why the departure from this baseline is such that he owes me something back, right? And so the claim here, and it's a philosophical claim, is that corrective justice duties most of the time, or at least in a very significant amount of cases, need to be parasitic on distributive claims. Namely, you need a view about distributive justice in the first place to explain why I owe you something back. You owe me something back because it was mine in the first place. And so I need a theory to explain why it was mine in the first place. And that is, for many things, provided by a distributive view. So that's the first problem we face. If we think that corrective duties are stronger than distributive duties, and then we find out that actually they can only derive their force from underlying distributive duties, then we have a problem. Right? Second problem. Probably most of you think that you should not be held morally responsible for fixing things that you were not able to prevent. And this is the case for all the actions that took place before we were conceived or born. So if you ground your duties regarding past actions on corrective grounds, you will face this problem. You say, you cannot hold me responsible morally in the corrective sense for actions that I was not responsible for causally. So in the most minimal sense, I was not even able to prevent them from happening. And so this is the second problem we face when we try to ground climate justice duties on historical emissions on corrective grounds. So what follows from this? So it follows that it doesn't follow that we don't have any duties. It just follows that the grounds on which we base our duties should be different than the ones we are thinking about. So the suggestion here is that we should adopt a primarily distributive account of global justice and of global climate justice. Of course, as for any distributive view, there will remain some room for corrective justice, but it will be limited to our interactions as contemporaries, because there, of course, we are able to prevent certain things from happening because we are here and we are able to do certain stuff. Then comes the final question, the fear that negotiators or people defending African interests would say, but if you do that, of course, the duties will be so much weaker, right? Weaker philosophically, or maybe also weaker in the sense of a lesser magnitude of duties, right? And what I want to say here is that philosophically weaker, it cannot be the case because the strength of corrective duties derives mostly and nearly completely from the background distributive view that grounds it. Okay, so they cannot be stronger philosophically. And there's also no reason to think that the magnitude of these duties, the volumes of financial transfers, let's say, should be smaller than if you do it in corrective terms, right? We could try to develop that, but I'm really convinced about that. Developing this is difficult because it depends on the specific view about distributive justice that you have, of course. But the baseline is that you are able to justify as much, if not much more significant transfers to the global south on distributive grounds than on corrective grounds. And so the dilemma we face is that we have a public discourse, and that's a factual assumption, a public discourse that tries to frame everything in corrective terms. By doing so, it weakens the distributive accounts because it sends the message that if you're not able to frame things in corrective terms, then you will fall back into something that looks like, oh yeah, if you're nice, you do it, but it's not really your duty. And so the dilemma is that we are forced to frame things in corrective terms. By doing so, we weaken in public discourse the distributive accounts. But by doing so, we also disguise underlying philosophical problems that are significant. And if you scratch, you see that these corrective duties, when it comes to acts of the past, are philosophically really difficult to justify. So that's what I wanted to present you today. It's not really about African philosophy, but it's something that I believe is relevant to African philosophers. And I started thinking about it when once I had to discuss with negotiators from the South. There was a big room in front of me, and I tried to convince them, and I could see that none of them got convinced. And so I thought there must be something significant there. That's why I wanted to share that with you too. Thank you.